There comes a moment when your body simply stops asking. The old cravings lose their voice. The rush, the chase, the noise of validation, or fade into a strange, unsettling quiet. Society calls that emptiness. But Jung would call it the beginning of revelation, because when the body goes silent, the soul begins to speak. If you've ever felt detached from the world of desire, not cold, just distant, this message is for you. Stay until the end, because we'll explore the hidden spiritual mechanism behind abstinence, why your silence isn't weakness, but preparation for awakening. Carl Jung once said that everything we repress returns as destiny. And in today's world, we repress one thing above all: stillness. We fill every gap with noise, every pause with distraction. We chase stimulation, validation, connection, anything that keeps us from feeling the vast, quiet space within. So when the body finally chooses silence, when desire fades or energy withdraws, we panic. We label it failure, loneliness, loss. But what if it isn't? What if that silence isn't the absence of life, but its reorganization? Jung believed that when one part of us goes quiet, another is preparing to speak. And abstinence, whether chosen consciously or brought on by exhaustion, heartbreak, or timing, is not punishment. It's a natural recalibration. The psyche withdrawing from outer chaos to rebuild its inner architecture. Think of a lake stirred by endless ripples, waves caused by wind, footsteps, stones tossed in by others. For so long, that lake can't reflect anything clearly. But when the surface finally stills, it begins to mirror the sky. That's what happens when your body stops chasing pleasure. It becomes still enough to reflect your soul. In that stillness, something remarkable happens. The boundaries between your inner and outer worlds begin to blur. You start to notice subtler movements, the rhythm of your breath, the pulse beneath your skin, the faint hum of being itself. And at first, it feels unfamiliar, even unsettling. Because for years, your worth was measured by reaction, by who looked, who wanted, who responded. Now, in the absence of those echoes, you're left with yourself, raw, unfiltered, waiting to be met. This is the moment most people turn away. They rush to fill the silence with another voice, another body, another dopamine spark. But if you resist that impulse, if you let the stillness linger, you begin to perceive something deeper. That the silence is not empty at all. It's full, dense with meaning, memory, and messages the psyche has been trying to deliver for years. Jung called this the return of the soul's symbols, the dreams that resurface, the emotions you'd numbed, the inner child who still waits to be seen. All of it begins to re-emerge in the quiet, asking to be understood. The modern world teaches us to fear that encounter, to mistake it for depression, boredom, or stagnation. But the psyche knows what it's doing. It withdraws your energy from external desire so it can heal the internal wounds that made desire feel like survival in the first place. You are not being deprived. You're being refined. Your body is not shutting down. It's clearing space. And just like that still lake, when the waves finally rest, the reflection that appears is not new. It was always there. You just couldn't see it through the motion. So, if your body has gone quiet, if you find yourself uninterested in what once excited you, don't rush to awaken the noise again. Sit in it. Let the stillness do its work. Because what's forming beneath that silence is the shape of your next becoming. The world will tell you, you're missing out. You've grown distant. You've become cold. But Carl Jung would argue the exact opposite, that this is the moment you begin moving closer to your authentic self. Every soul, he said, must one day experience separation from the collective unconscious, that invisible network of shared beliefs and instincts that governs how most people live, love, and desire. For a while you belong to it. You play by its rules, chase what you're told to chase, love how you're told to love, measure your worth by how others see you. But something inside you begins to ache. A quiet voice whispers, "This isn't me." You stop pretending. You stop chasing. You stop confusing attention with affection. And suddenly, the world you used to fit into starts to feel too small. Conversations that once thrilled you now sound like echoes. The roles you played, the flirty one, the achiever, the pleaser, no longer fit. It's disorienting, isn't it? To watch others move easily through the old rhythms while you stand still, caught between what was and what's coming next. People may tell you you've changed. They'll say you're too quiet, too picky, or too withdrawn. But what's really happening is not withdrawal. It's distillation. You're not losing your essence. You're purifying it. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, always requires solitude. Because it's in solitude that the ego begins to soften, making space for what he called the self, that vast, luminous center of consciousness that's been waiting to emerge. When you begin to detach from the collective, the ego panics. It whispers, "You're falling behind. You're losing connection. You're not enough." But in truth, you are being reconnected, not to the world's noise, but to your soul's rhythm. The collective thrives on repetition. Same stories, same desires, same patterns. Individuation asks for courage, to stand alone, to ask deeper questions, to live by an inner compass rather than outer applause. It's no wonder people find it strange. Imagine standing in a crowded room where everyone is dancing to a beat only they can hear. You pause, suddenly realizing the music doesn't move you anymore. They keep dancing, but you step away, following a quieter melody rising from within. That's what this phase feels like. A gentle rebellion, a sacred pause between old programming and new awareness. It's uncomfortable. Yes, you might feel invisible. You might question your worth. But Jung would say, that is the necessary darkness before self-recognition. Because only in solitude can you see what was real and what was performance. Only in silence can you separate who you truly are from who you were taught to be. So when the world tells you you're missing something, remember, you're not losing life. You're returning to it. The noise was never living. The chase was never love. This misunderstood phase, this in-between space, is where authenticity begins to take shape. The world may not understand it, but your soul does. And someday soon, you'll look back and realize this was never isolation. It was initiation. Desire doesn't disappear, it transforms. When the body grows silent, when it no longer seeks constant stimulation, the energy that once poured outward begins to move differently. It doesn't die, it rises. Jung called this libido transmutation, the conversion of raw sexual energy into psychic, creative, and spiritual force. The ancient mystics knew this long before psychology gave it a name. The yogis called it prana, the alchemists sacred fire. They all understood the same truth. When desire stops being spent on pursuit, it begins to build light within. Every act of restraint becomes a kind of distillation. Every withheld impulse becomes potential energy, waiting to be rechanneled. And as that energy rises, you change. You start to dream more vividly. You notice synchronicities, the song that plays at the right moment, the stranger who speaks the words you needed to hear. Your intuition sharpens. Your creativity deepens. What once felt like emptiness begins to feel electric, charged with invisible possibility. Jung saw this as the psyche reclaiming its archetypal voice. The anima and animus, your inner feminine and masculine essences, waking up after years of being projected onto others. The anima brings intuition, emotion, and depth. The animus brings clarity, focus, and strength. When they begin to harmonize, something extraordinary happens. You no longer chase what you used to look for in others. You embody it. That is the real secret of this phase. You're not suppressing life. You're refining it. The same energy that once fueled longing now fuels awareness. The same passion that once sought others now builds the bridge to your higher self. Think of it like alchemy. Raw ore placed in fire until the impurities burn away. What remains is gold, luminous, pure, indestructible. In spiritual terms, abstinence is that fire. It doesn't kill the impulse. It elevates it. It teaches your system to hold power without needing to discharge it. This is why so many artists, healers, mystics, and visionaries throughout history have spoken of periods of solitude and restraint as sacred. They weren't rejecting pleasure. They were redirecting it, because when you stop leaking your vitality through constant external pursuit, your inner world becomes incandescent. You begin to sense beauty in simplicity. You feel more alive in stillness than you ever did in chaos. You start to understand what Jung meant when he said that true individuation is not achieved by addition, but by subtraction. Every distraction you release gives birth to clarity. Every attachment you dissolve frees a new stream of awareness. And so, slowly, you begin to glow from within. Not for attention, not for validation, but because your life force finally has nowhere left to run except home. Jung would say that in this moment, the unconscious and the conscious finally meet, not as opposites, but as partners. Desire no longer rules you, it serves you. And that's when you realize something profound. You were never truly deprived. You were being purified. Ask yourself, am I lonely or am I listening? Because sometimes the difference between the two is revelation. Yet this silence is not always peaceful. When the body grows still, when the noise of desire fades, the shadow begins to stir. Jung wrote that the moment we stop distracting ourselves, the psyche opens its basement door. And everything we've stored there, shame, fear, grief, longing, the parts we've denied, begins to rise. You may notice it as restlessness, sudden irritability, the urge to reach for someone, anyone, just to escape the discomfort. But this is not regression. It's purification. The silence you've created has become a mirror, one so clear that even your hidden self can no longer hide. Jung never saw the shadow as evil. He called it unlived life, energy that has been echoed from consciousness, waiting for permission to return home. And abstinence, whether physical, emotional, or energetic, becomes the crucible where that reunion begins. Every craving now carries a message, every temptation, a reflection. Ask yourself, what am I really reaching for? Touch or peace? Because often, what we call desire is really displacement. an attempt to soothe the ache of our own unmet presence. In Jungian terms, this is the integration crisis, when the unconscious material, long buried, begins to surface, not to punish, but to be transformed. The modern mind mistakes this phase for failure. We say, "I'm losing progress. I'm falling apart." But in truth, you are falling inward. The silence has made you transparent to yourself. And this transparency can feel terrifying, because for the first time, there's nowhere left to hide. Yet it's precisely here, in this flickering tension between resistance and revelation, that transformation begins. Imagine the psyche as molten metal in the fire. The heat doesn't destroy it. It melts away what's false so the true form can emerge. When you sit with your cravings without acting on them, you transmute them. When you feel loneliness and stay present, you turn pain into presence. When you face the shadow, not as a monster but as a messenger, you reclaim your power. Jung described this as the alchemical stage of nigredo, the blackening, the necessary darkness before the gold appears. So if the silence feels heavy, if the solitude begins to hum with discomfort, remember, that's not emptiness. That's energy reorganizing itself. Your psyche is learning to hold tension instead of collapsing into craving. You are teaching your nervous system that peace doesn't come from escape. It comes from endurance. And slowly, through this sacred endurance, something miraculous occurs. The shadow softens. It stops fighting. It stops frightening. Because it realizes you're finally listening. You're no longer trying to exile parts of yourself. You're welcoming them home. The fragmented self begins to fuse. Body, mind, and soul aligning in one quiet frequency. This is why Jung believed that true spiritual maturity doesn't happen in ecstasy, but in confrontation. Not when you're dancing in the light, but when you can sit still with your own darkness and call it sacred. The silence is your initiation. The shadow is your teacher. And together, they are preparing you for wholeness. And then, something changes. The silence that once felt like eggs, like emptiness, begins to soften. It no longer feels like punishment. It feels like presence. What once felt like loss becomes sacred ground. What once felt hollow becomes holy. You start to sense a rhythm deeper than the heartbeat, a quiet pulse beneath the noise of thought, a steady whisper saying, "I am here." The tension dissolves. The loneliness that once ached now hums with serenity. The craving that once drove you outward now fuels a luminous peace within. Jung called this the union of opposites, the sacred marriage within the psyche, the moment when the inner masculine and feminine, the animus and the anima, stop chasing each other through other people and finally meet inside you. The masculine steadies the current, the feminine fills it with feeling. Together they create harmony, not as dualities, but as one continuous flow. In that union, something extraordinary happens. You no longer seek to be chosen. You choose. You no longer chase love to fill a void. You embody love as a natural state of being. Jung taught that this inner reconciliation marks the beginning of true wholeness, the emergence of what he called the self, the complete, integrated soul that no longer depends on outer validation to feel alive. And this is the truth behind abstinence, the mystery hidden beneath the surface of restraint. It was never about denying life. It was about redirecting it. The body's silence is not repression, it's transformation. It's the same energy, but transmuted from hunger into harmony, from seeking into seeing. You start to realize that desire never truly disappears. It evolves. What once burned chaotically as longing now burns as purpose. What once screamed as emptiness now glows as meaning. You no longer feel the urge to consume life. You begin to create it. Through art, through compassion, through the quiet grace of your presence. This is the moment Jung would call the illumination phase, the soul's awakening after its long night. The dawn of inner sovereignty. You are no longer a seeker of warmth. You are the source of it. You are both the flame and the observer of its light. And in that realization, everything slows down. The world still spins, but you are no longer caught in its noise. You watch it move from a center that feels infinite, a center that was never missing, only waiting. The body is no longer a battlefield. It becomes a vessel, sacred, still, luminous. The soul, once muffled beneath the clamor of desire, now sings clearly through it. This moment of calm power is the true voice of abstinence. Not silence as suppression, but silence as communion. Because when the body goes silent, the soul finally speaks. And what it says is simple, but eternal. You were never lacking, you were becoming. So if your body has grown silent, don't rush to fill the quiet. Sit in it. Listen. Because that silence you feel, it's not the absence of love. It's the soil where real love takes root. Not the kind born of longing or validation, but the kind that grows from awareness, from wholeness, from truth. Jung once said, "What we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate." Your stillness is that sacred pause, the chance to bring your hidden patterns, your unseen desires into the light, to stop repeating the old story and start writing a conscious one. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. The body rests, but the soul is awakening. So if life feels quiet right now, know that beneath that silence, something extraordinary is reorganizing itself. A new language is being written within you, one that speaks not in noise, but in knowing. Subscribe for more Jungian reflections and shadow work journeys, because here, every quiet moment becomes a revelation.